Hi, everybody. I'm Jackie Kiger, and welcome to this year's TLC panel discussion for supporting military students. We have two presentations for you, followed by our Q&A panel discussion today. Now, as a reminder, audience members, your microphones and videos should be muted for this presentation, but I encourage you to post your questions and comments in the chat, and also keep your eye on the chat for a link to the session feedback survey. I'm going to go ahead and post that now so you can bookmark it. And our first presentation will be Back to Basics, an instructor's field guide to working with military students by Molnar and Becky Campbell. Our second presentation will be Engaging Military Affiliated Students, How to Create a Comprehensive Military Career Resource by Matthew Phillips and Amanda Johnson. Now, as we go into this presentation today, I'd like to start with just a quick poll of who you are as our audience. So you should see on the screen here, one second. You should see a poll where we're curious if you're a student, alumni, faculty, or perhaps some other category. I see people are voting. I appreciate that. One more second here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end that. And then I'm going to share the results just to give us an idea who we are as we begin this discussion to how to best support our military students. It is my pleasure to introduce Molly, Molnar, and Becky Campbell. Molly is a lead faculty member in the Center of First Year Experience, and Becky is an assistant professor in the Center of First Year Experience. They're going to be sharing on the topic Back to Basics, an instructor's field guide to working with military students. Molly, welcome. The microphone is yours.
Thank you so much, Becky. We're really excited to have you all joining today. Becky and I have, let me go ahead and go to the next slide, have actually polled some of our faculty to get a list of some of the most frequently asked questions that faculty are receiving in the classroom from students. This was done with all of the math faculty and then most recently with our Center for the First Year Experience faculty. And we got a really good idea about what instructors are hearing, what they'd like to know, and that's what we've created this presentation around. So we're also creating a guide, an actual tangible thing that you keep and reference. So anyone that's here with us today will as well, and we'll kind of cover all of the basics in our presentation since we can only go over so much. Anything you want to add, Becky, before we get started? Nope, okay. So the first thing we wanted to start with was just a definition of what we consider a military student here at Ashford. And we have a very broad definition compared to some other places. It actually encompasses any active duty, any veteran, spouses, dependents, Department of Defense. So really any type of affiliation would be considered one of our military students. You receive those emails saying you have a military student in your class, it can be referring to any class like that. And we have now built up resources around all of those different groups. So Becky's actually a military spouse, so she's able to speak to that point, and we'll answer some questions on that later as well. And we wanted to just share a little bit about some of the demographics, some of the specifics about who our military students are, what their motivations are. This is it might be a little bit difficult to see, but if anyone would like a copy or would like to have that, we can provide it after the presentation. But one of the things that we found most interesting looking at this from a faculty perspective would be at the bottom. It goes over some of the reasons that military students are returning to school. So it says about 11% are looking at earning more money. And the other two are related to personal growth and development, and then job. career. So advancement either in the career they have or starting a new career. So that's something that's really important to keep in mind when you're working with this population is you're making it relevant. How are you bringing it back around to that career focus? And luckily for all of us, we have career services that's going to follow up on that in more detail after our presentation. So what are some of the barriers to success? So there could be, this list is not exhaustive, but these are some of the most common that we see with specific to our military students. So scheduling conflicts, unlike other, students, sometimes things come up out of the blue where they can't plan ahead. So it's good to keep in the back of your mind. We have the training stuff there. Deployment, a lot of times the deployments are known, but for a spouse, we think about that. So if an active duty service member leaves and the spouse is the one taking classes, think about everything that they have to go ahead and pick up, the kids, the household duties, and all of the things that just shift over. And a lot of times they're questioning, can I do this in school? So how are we able to move in and support them during either the transition or during the time when their spouse is, active duty? Just training, inability to access course materials, so they can't maybe get to their textbook, or maybe they don't have access to the internet for either a certain period of time or for extended period. So those are all just things just to kind of think about. And if you think about dealing with students, I bet a couple of these come up. If there's any that are not on this list and you'd like to share them, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Because there's, like I said, it's not an exhaustive list, but these are these top ones. And we've been asked over and over, okay, anytime we give a presentation, what is the best practice for working with military students? And that's kind of a hard thing to answer because it's kind of different every time depending on what the scenario is. But what we found that doesn't change is what you bring to the table. So you as the faculty member, your disposition, those qualities of willing to help, and all of those things, that's kind of the best practice. So if you have what we're calling your box filled, if you have, all of the knowledge that you need, what you're able to do, that's really the thing that's going to push you into yes, this is practice. You are serving, your military student at the best that you can. So a couple of things to keep in mind. Care and concern. I'm not sure if anyone here in this presentation was able to attend the presentation yesterday by Morgan Johnson and Teresa Carrick. It was fantastic. They talked about time and crisis with COVID, but they talked about this care and concern that instructors should have. And it's the exact same thing when you're dealing with military students or really any of our students. So it's just type of mentality. Empathy is huge because you have to understand where they're coming from in order to work with them. Really genuine care and concerns so that you're following up, and then knowing your resources and also knowing what you can do within the parameters that are involved. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but really if you have yourself, like we said, all put together, this is the starting point. This is the foundation. You can build from there and you can always get more knowledge. But if you're starting from this place of, yes, I want to help, and yes, I'm open to learning how, then that's what we're going to call best practice. I love that you're shaking your head, Becky. You tell me if you want to add anything. Okay, so some of the factors to consider, and these are, again, those parameters that we have to work in as working for a university. So the attendance policy, we don't want to tell a student, oh, sure, you can go ahead and log in 14 days, no problem, if that's going to somehow go against some existing policy. So attendance policy, any other policies like the late policy that are already in place that we don't want to violate. We want to make sure that we're staying true to those and then working within that. Any type of course specific needs. So whichever classes either you're teaching or you're taking that may need to be met. So for instance, in the first course, ASH 101, there's a bar, which means they have to the grade requirements by a certain time period in the class. So the instructor can't push those grades. So just kind of keeping those things in mind. And then any limitations that the student brings to the table. So you might offer a suggestion or something to do, and they say, I can't do that because of X, Y, and Z. So those are all of the things that you want to kind of keep in mind as you come to the table to make a plan and to meet them where they are.
And Molly, if I could just jump in and add, these factors aren't meant to be limitations to working with the students. They're just, they have to be considered as you work with a military student. So just parameters to keep in mind, but nothing that's supposed to limit you with working with a military student.
Absolutely. And then Becky, can you go ahead and take over the student scenario, the kind of the big scenario next?
Sure. So military students, there are so many scenarios that we could go over, but we don't have time for that today. So we're covering kind of like the two biggest scenarios that can happen with a military student. And the first is inability to access the course materials, whether it's the class, the textbook, any of the articles or other website links that they may need to gain access to. And that could be because they're in the field without internet. It could be because they're on duty and they can't get to a computer. So what we mostly encourage is a lot of planning ahead, which is difficult for a military student when they may not know what's happening down the line. So what we recommend as soon as they get access to the course, which should be the Thursday before the course actually starts, is to download the textbook. Constellation textbooks have PDF files, they have audio files, and they usually have Kindle ebook files. So the students should be able to download the textbook and save it. The course guide, must download the course guide, save it somewhere, print it out, because that will list all of the work for the entire class. So they will always have access to that, internet or not, especially if they are able to print it out, they will always have it, whether they have a device or not. And then any articles that the student might need. What we really recommend, and it's on the slide here, is to click on everything each week. At the beginning of each week, just click on every link that they're going to need for that link and make sure they can pop it open. So working ahead when they possibly can. If they can work ahead, that can mitigate any time that they might miss. Sometimes a student will get a call in the middle of class and say, hey, you're going to the field for a week, no devices. It happens, and they have no control over that. So working ahead when possible and creating a plan to make up missed work. So maybe they anticipate their 5 weeks are going to go just fine, but if they work ahead when they can, and then they get that call or they have overnight duty on a day discussions that was their plan to do their discussion posts, then they have a plan in place. And contacting their instructor and letting them know they're military, they're active duty, XYZ may come up is really super, super helpful to them. There's a little bullet point down there that talks about potential alternate assignments. For many students who may be using a computer on a military base, they can have restrictions in several ways. The level of security that a base needs to maintain will sometimes prevent students from accessing the materials they need, to having to use a computer on the base, which is basically a community computer. They have a computer center and they may have a limited amount of time to use that computer. So that can even prevent them using any type of computer on base, can prevent them from accessing certain materials. So that bullet point that says potential alternate assignments, many courses have this consideration. They either make sure that a student using an on-base computer will be able to access it, or there are certain courses that have a potential alternate assignment. This isn't necessarily broadcast out to faculty because we try to make the courses so military students don't have to worry about this. But if a student is ever telling you that they cannot access a material, check in with your faculty point of contact or your lead faculty to see if an alternate assignment has been developed for that specific reason. I can tell you I teach English 122 and we have a resource that we've not really run into any problems with, which is fantastic, but we know it is a potential issue for military students. So we do have an alternate assignment for one of these activities, just in case they aren't able to get to it. Molly, if you could go to the next slide. And then the other scenario is limited internet access. Like I mentioned, sometimes they have to use a computer center on the base. Sometimes they have to borrow a device. A lot of students have some sort of device, but not everybody does. And we can't assume that they have device and internet access 24/7. Sometimes a student is able to use if they work in an office situation with the military, they're able to use their work computer to complete their work, but sometimes they're not. So things we can do as instructors are to reach out to students at the beginning of class, either through an announcement or through an email message, and just say, hey, if you're military, let me know. Sometimes students aren't terribly comfortable sharing that they're military. Some are more than happy to share that they're military, but some don't really want any special treatment because of it. So just let them know, reach out to me just so I know in case something comes up and we can work together. And then devising a plan. As soon as something comes up, work with the student and get creative. Remind them to work ahead. Remind them to click on all of those links to make sure they can access all of those materials we talked about, and help students leverage the technology that they do have. You can get really creative. One of the things I remind them is that they can do work by hand and then type it up when they do have access to a device. It's not ideal, but if they can at least outline their ideas, it saves time when they do have that computer access or have that internet access. Or maybe they have a device, but they don't have Wi-Fi all the time or internet all the time. They can work in a Word document, which we advise all of our students to do anyway, is to create your work in Word so you can save it and then copy and paste it into the classrooms to really maximize that internet time when you need to be connected for quizzes, waypoint submissions, discussion submissions, and certain other activities that require an internet access. Make use of smartphones. We have apps for Ashford and also for Constellation. And the Constellation, when you work in the Constellation app, it carries over to the web app. So if you log in through a web browser on the computer, your notes will be saved there. So really use that Constellation app as much as you can. Sometimes students rely on their smartphone as their Wi-Fi device, which works in a lot of cases, not entirely every case, but if they can use their smartphone even to jot down their ideas and email them to themselves, that helps. I try to tell students to use a flash drive, but when we're talking about using a base computer, that's not always, that doesn't always work. If you can work on one device, but you need to use another device for your internet access, a flash drive does help. But again, sometimes a military computer, a base computer, will have security that prevents the use of a flash drive. But again, emailing yourself, that can help. And I want to say, did I go through all my tricks there, Molly?
I think you covered a lot. Let's see. One thing that we definitely stress, and you did cover it, was at the beginning of class, setting up the expectation of, and this isn't just for military students, really this does kind of speak to all of your students, but setting up that expectation that if you are going to have anything that's going to come up during that next 5 weeks, or if it's a graduate class, 6 weeks, to please go ahead and communicate with your instructor, like at the beginning of class, saying something like, I might have training in week 4, or so that you're able to plan ahead. Or someone in the chat, Sean, mentioned on a Navy ship, there's going to be connectivity issues, and you might have internet access only in the middle of the night. So letting your instructor know that at the very beginning of class is going to be extremely helpful. So as faculty, setting up that expectation, whether it be an email, an announcement, and as students, communicating with the faculty members. So I think that's a big point. And we actually do have a sample announcement, or you can use it as a communication like email in the field guide. So that's something that we will kind of share with all of you, that's been very helpful to help you identify the students in your class that are military or are spouses, so they have something going on, just that you want to kind of keep them on the radar. So that would be the only point I would add to that. Since we are at the end of our slides, and we're moving into just wrapping it up and explaining just a little bit more about the resource, I wondered if we could take a moment and just, if you would like, it's not mandatory, type in the chat your military affiliation. So if you're active duty and you'd like to share what branch of the military, or you're a veteran, again, like to share that with us. We'd like to hear. If you just work with military students, we'd like to know that. Or if you're just a military supporter and here to kind of find out a little bit more. So if anyone's willing to kind of put that in the chat, it's helpful for Becky and I to know, but also for our next set of presenters as well, just to get an idea of who's in the presentation today. So let's see. Oh, and Jackie, our wonderful host, he is retired Coast Guard. I've heard that. It's a good story. If anyone knows Jackie, let him tell you the story. And I guess we'll just go to our last slide here. Becky, do you want to wrap it up, or you want me to take it?
No, I got it. I mean, please reach out to us with any questions. We are more than happy to help. We field a lot, and Molly and I have been, Molly especially has been working with military students for so long. And I have, just in my capacity as an instructor, but having worked with adults and a lot of military affiliated students in various capacities, I know a lot of what different scenarios can happen. And we really tried not to put too much. We were so afraid we were going to go over time. We cut back a lot. So please ask questions. So we have this instructor field guide coming out to go over many more of these scenarios, kind of what happens, what's the difference between being active duty versus a reservist or part of the National Guard, what a spouse versus a veteran versus a retiree is, what spouses might go through. So we'll be sending that out, but still, if you still have more questions, please do reach out to us.
Right. And I would say to that point, you're right. We've done it for so long, and we've kind of learned a lot of the tips and tricks. And so it's really sometimes about just getting creative and maybe something that you hadn't thought of. So we are always willing to kind of brainstorm plans or new ideas. Or if you have something that you say, hey, this has happened to me and it's not in your field guide, let us know. We'll add it in. So we really appreciate everyone's time. We're looking forward to the panel in a little bit, but we're going to pass it back over to Jackie.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Becky and Molly. I appreciate your time in sharing with us today, but I especially appreciate the brokers of information that you are, and the kind of stepping me through. My day job is as a faculty member, and I'm always looking for ways for my students to succeed. And I kind of thought I had the 411 with my prior military experience, but I retired about the time the internet came online. So, you know what? I've greatly benefited from some tricks of the trade here when students perhaps do need to email themselves so that they know they've safeguarded their homework and things of that nature. So I'm certainly putting that in my bag of tricks for helping them to succeed.